Hello, Mayor Canna. Approximately 35 staff on the line, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, and again, welcome to everyone for our fourth night of budget deliberations. We'll be moving shortly into into motions from the floor, and we can entertain any that reach back into the budget binder or general motions. After last night, I would remind everyone to try and keep your motions, comments, and questions related to budget items, and we'll try and keep focused to keep moving forward. Tonight, we will start with any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Does anyone want to declare pecuniary interest? I see no hands. So we will move on next to deputations before we go over for some updates and opening remarks. So we'll move right into deputations now.
This first deputation is from Ryan Jackson. Hello, Council. My name is Ryan Jackson and a homeowner in Chatham. I'd like to add my opinion on one-time use of reserve funds to reduce the tax increase. My wife and I lived in geared to income housing and collected Ontario Works while I was looking for a job and she worked part-time. Once I found a job that had paid enough to stop collecting Ontario Works and we moved to market rent, we used Chatham-Kent's municipal program to help us with a down payment and buy our first home. Owning this home has been our proudest moment, and Councillor Harrigan, I commend you on your passion to help people like myself to achieve this outcome. That being said, I want to now talk about prevention and protecting those who receive a helping hand so they don't fall down. I have been on and off work because of COVID, and paying my bills are more challenging. This is a budget year unlike any year, while you are challenged with inflation, investment, and assistance. This year, we need not to worry about kicking the can down the road, but perhaps looking at a reserve where you could pull from and making a cut to funds going into that same fund next year. When Latimer suggested taking the surplus from Together CK, I think taking that surplus and applying it to the budget would be a responsible use of our tax dollars rather than it sit in a reserve to be used as party money after COVID. She wasn't suggesting cutting the program, rather it was a use or lose it solution. In closing, take care of your tax base and protect us. We are the ones that will be funding the future of Chatham-Kent, and we need help too. Thank you for your work, Ryan Jackson. This next deputation was submitted by Jacqueline Faubert. The current proposed 2021 Chatham-Kent budget tax rate sits at 2.58%. I know this percentage number is important, but I feel it is just as important to focus on the dollar amount impact to tax bills. On an average Chatham-Kent home, the total dollar increase to the owner's property tax bill would be $83 over 1 year. I ask that Chatham-Kent's Chief Financial Advisor please verify the accuracy of this dollar amount for Council. I believe this dollar increase is well worth the smart investment in maintaining and improving Chatham-Kent services and infrastructure. Every resident in Chatham-Kent is being affected by the current pandemic in different ways. We need municipal services and funds to support everyone's needs while dealing with the pandemic, and those needs are only going to increase as upper level funding diminishes. I do not believe in making one-time cuts to reserves or cost share programs and then have to top them up next year with a potential 7% tax increase. Making cuts to infrastructure and social services also goes against this council's priority of growth, community wellness, and environmental sustainability. If you want Chatham-Kent to continue growing its population and thus lower the tax burden, we need to have CK be an attractive place to live with safe roads, affordability plans, and updated emergency services. I appreciate the council's efforts in lowering the original proposed tax rate. Smart savings is best for everyone. I feel that all of the smart cuts to the budget have been made and council should approve the current 2.58% tax rate. Moving forward, I do challenge this council to keep pushing municipal staff to find efficiencies with delivering services, get creative with infrastructure investments, and find savings with in-house engineering project responsibilities. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with council. Sincerely, Jacqueline Faubert. This last deputation was submitted by Sammy Habib. After hearing last night's budget committee tackle the annual budget, I have come to realize that the voice of the silent majority has not been relayed to council. I, as a new homeowner and recent new member of the community of Chatham, I must say I am disheartened to listen to some councillors who seem to be voicing the concerns of themselves and their other 7 circle neighbors in regards to a municipal budget. I have personally worked at all 3 levels of government, and one rule I have learned over the years in regards to growth: in order to expand a community, you need to prove to the outsiders that you are a cause of attraction more than where they are living at now. That means the reputation of the municipality is dependent on a strong and healthy infrastructure. That means that is it better for me to pay $9 a year and increase charges for making my home is for making sure my home is not flooded when it rains is much better than paying an extra $30-40 a month in extra insurance charge for filing a claim. I feel safe that the housing crisis is resolved because it's widely known and public knowledge that when homelessness increases, that leads to increases in psychological problems, which leads to drug abuse, which in turn leads to more psychological problems, and 8 times out of 10 to increase in crime, which, surprise, surprise, leads to increase in policing costs and stress on the health unit for treatment. As someone with over a decade of government experience, I must say and emphasize that every cut you do in regards to public service, you're stepping not 1, but 3 steps backwards. I plead to council members that understand my point of view to look at the bigger picture and try not to give in to the minority voices that will always speak of a cut to service and decrease in taxes because it benefits their clique surrounding them. Thank you kindly, Sammy Habib.
Thank you. And before we move into motions from the floor and questions, we're going to start with a bit of an update and overview of where we currently are. So I will turn it over to Don.
Thank you, Budget Chair. In addition to an update, I just want to provide a couple of remarks to respond to questions that I know a number of council members have received from citizens, and also a number of those that come directly to staff. So start by saying that this is likely or arguably the most challenging budget deliberations we've had in over 10 years. In addition to our regular challenges, we have also needed to consider the uncertainties and economic consequences of COVID. Last night, Councillor Roche stated that our budget binder looked a whole lot different than in previous years, and that's true. The draft budget reflects that both council and administration has recognized the challenges facing our community, and we tried to develop a budget to meet those challenges. Last summer, we started when the Economic Recovery Task Force reported to Council and recommended that Council work towards a 0% target. Council and directed administration to do so, and we prepared strategies to get to 0. As we're in the middle of deliberations, I wanted to point out to taxpayers that as a result of those increased efficiencies, including a reduction of 5.5 full-time employees, and also our assessment growth, we actually started this budget deliberations or preparation at a minus 0.11%. We did have to take into consideration decisions that we made last year during the 2020 budget deliberations, and a combination of using reserves to offset some of our proposed tax costs, and also our council priorities. That raised our initial starting point from minus 0.11 to 0.94. I think it's important for our citizens to recognize that the vast majority of the, or at least more than half of our current proposed tax increase, we're currently at 2.58, 1.43% of the current draft budget is directly related to infrastructure. And why that's so important is the municipality owns approximately $4 billion in physical assets. Every year, we're projecting that we should be investing $90 million just to maintain our existing physical assets, just to keep things in the same condition they were, to keep repairs going. Every year right now, we're investing about $53 million, which leaves us with a $40 million shortfall every single year. Council has recognized that. They've been taking very responsible steps for several years now to try and shorten that gap, or to reduce the gap, so we can continue to take care of our infrastructure. And as a result of where we're currently sitting, if this was approved, we'd be spending approximately 5.21% on our infrastructure maintenance compared to where we were at the 2020 levels. We did also receive some reductions from the provincial government. Our Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund received a reduction of $341,400 from last year. Part of our proposed tax increase also goes to address that. A number of council members and staff have received comments about the number of staff we have in the municipality. I draw the public's attention to tab 10 of the budget binder, which is available online. It details all of the staff that we have in all of the different departments by department, and it provides a 5-year comparison. If you look at the individual services, you'll see that every one of those staff are tied to delivering a level of service, and they can't be, they're tied closely together. So we have in the past year looked at ways that we could actually reduce service levels or recommend those. Those have been included in our budget binder under tab 9H. But those are difficult to come by. It means that we have to consider a service reduction, and that's often hard for the community to accept. So council does have some choices there. If we're looking at further budget reductions, minimum service levels in some areas, like the maintenance of our roads, are required by the provincial government. So it's very difficult to reduce those levels of service, but we do have some options to reduce levels of service. Unfortunately, those are often the things that contribute to our quality of life, like our recreation and sports programs, our libraries, and our cultural programs. There is some choice there, but over the years, council's also had to make some very tough decisions about maintaining the quality of life. And I think one of the people that provided a deputation tonight talked about how we have to continue to reinvest so people want to live here and enjoy a quality of life. So I think council's has struggled with the budget, but what we're trying to do is to make sure that we're giving our residents the optimal level of service at the lowest possible cost. And now I'd like to pass the microphone over to Mr. Quinton, who's got some additional thoughts to share with council in terms of how we can continue to drive for efficiencies and provide our residents with the best possible service at the lowest possible price. Thank you. Mr. Quinton.
Thank you, Don. This is Gord Quinton, Chief Financial Officer speaking. Now, I understand that the public has a hard time grasping where this 2.58% increase is coming from. And I encourage anyone who hasn't already to go to our 2021 draft budget webpage and see for yourself. There really is no fluff in this budget. The items that you see are to resource the service levels that we are either mandated to deliver or that council has directed to reach their strategic goals. At Monday's council meeting, there is a couple key items that I'd like to highlight tonight as well. Number one, Councillor Latimer brought a notice of motion to do a service review in the customer service areas. And this is a perfect example of what we are asking to do well in advance of the annual budgets. If they feel that the excellent service levels can be provided differently to our residents, then bring it to our attention. We'll do a proper service review and bring options for council's considerations. And number two, I can tell you that Chatham-Kent is a very efficiently run operation. The BMA study details comparisons across all our services that bear that out. We can always strive to do better and strive to bring more efficiencies into the budget. Frontline staff, their managers, and EMT took 6 months developing the 2021 draft budget, and there were examples of efficiencies throughout. And I would personally like to thank everyone who put forward ideas for savings and staff level reductions where possible. In Monday's council package, a letter from Steve Clark, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, was included. Steve is a former municipal mayor himself and understands the pressures municipal budgets face. The ministry has offered round 2 of the municipal modernization program, and one of the options we could consider is hiring an outside independent expert to do an efficiency review of our entire organization. The ministry will fund 65% of the study, and my professional opinion is that Chatham-Kent is in a place to welcome this independent review. We have nothing to hide and welcome a spotlight on our operations. Of course, community engagement would be key to any such review, and our report will be coming to council at the March 1st meeting for their consideration. Service reviews will take on an even higher level of priority as we move to a multi-year budget as approved by council for the 2024 through 2027 budget years for the next term of council. The time spent on annual budgets by staff will be better utilized to find even more efficiencies and will provide the ability to analyze some of our larger services in great detail. I will close my comments by again pointing out that we are in the middle of a pandemic. The executive management team and staff have high priorities to deal with. There is no easy answer to this year's budget. There were actually only 7 items in the entire tax-funded budget that were ranked as should do by the executive management team. The rest were mandatory. The 2021 draft budget was indeed already very different from past ones, and that is why council has found it so tough. This is just what it takes to run the services that our citizens demand in Chatham-Kent. Thanks.
Thank you, Don and Gord. So we'll be moving to questions or clarifications, comments from the floor. Councillor Kirkwood-White, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Budget Chair. I think that Don and Gord have provided most of what I've been asked to ask, but I did have a question I was going to ask Kathy Hoffman last night when we ran out of time, and that was to reiterate the number of full-time staff that we had in 2020 compared to the number of full-time staff we are going to have in 2021, assuming everything goes forward tonight. And if she could give us a very brief summary or description of the new staff that we're hoping to hire, that the administration is hoping to hire, and the rationale for those staff.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. This is Kathy Hoffman, General Manager of Corporate Services. Thank you, Councillor Kirkwood-White, for your question. In 2020, the FTE number, full-time equivalent number, was 1,395. With the changes that Council will have seen through this budget with respect to staff, that number revised for 2021 will be 1,389.64 FTEs, which is a reduction of 5.5 FTEs. In addition to that reduction in terms of the FTEs, comes with it a reduction to the net tax impact rather of $19,786. So just again, to be clear about that, a reduction of 5.5 staff, notwithstanding the adds that are in here, and a reduction to the net tax impact of $19,786. The reason for this is that, as Don described in his opening comments, we had a reduction of 7.5 FTEs in the base budget this year, and a request for 2 additional positions to be added, which created the net 5.5. One of those positions is the case manager in the housing services area, which Council spoke about last night, and the other one is an environmental climate change technologist that I believe that you spoke about on the first or second evening. And those 2 positions have been identified to be added to our base budget, and they are part of what involves the tax impact. There are a series of other positions that are new this year, and they are grouped really into 2 categories. One category is one-time positions that feed to some of our existing services, and the other grouping of positions are one-time positions for new services. And I'll share a little bit of breakdown in each one of those for you just for clarity. So in the existing service category, and I might add, as you hear all of these positions, every single one of these positions are being funded by some other source rather than attracting a tax rate increase. So they are being funded predominantly by reserves that were set up to deal specifically with this kind of work. So as an example, in our community attraction and promotion area, there are adds to the local immigration and local immigration partnership wages for a coordinator and an assistant. There are also positions in our tourism development area for assisting that area with its initiatives. We also have a gallery summer camp leader, which is also funded from another source, a special populations summer team leader, and then we also have a full-time temporary housing claims analyst position. In addition to that, we have some web redesign and optimization technical resources for a one-year project that involves a senior web developer, a web systems administrator as well as for that particular initiative. And those are half-time FTEs to combine to make one. And then in our engineering transportation services area, we have a fiber permitting project there. It's a 2-year project and it is being funded out of our strategic development reserve. So those are all adds to existing services. We then have a grouping of positions that are in the budget that revolve around new services, and they too are funded from reserves, and they deal with things like in our planning area, a planning technician. We also have a number of staff being hired for the isolation sheltering services out of our employment and social services area and our homelessness prevention program. And then we have other positions to assist in our employment and social services area to accommodate some changes in programming that we've had. And this is with what we call a local system support position, which is a technology-based position in that area. We also have a pilot program with a return to work specialist being funded out of our closed session reserve. And then we have corporate digital transformation projects underway, which involves a series of staff, an application administrator, and a business analyst. And finally, in our information tech and transformation area, we have a GIS system architecture project and upgrade there for an application administrator. So all told, those positions are, they're not being added to the base budget. They are being funded from a reserve for 2021. And I did just want to point out that I mentioned earlier that there was a tax impact for the environmental claim change technologist, and there isn't actually an additional tax impact for that. It has been in place for the past 2 years, being funded by council as well. So hopefully that clarifies. Does that answer your questions, Councillor Kirkwood-White?
It does. Thank you very much, Kathy, for the overview.
Very welcome.
Thank you. So we'll continue on with questions or motions from the floor. Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question or comment maybe is through you to Gord. A lot of people don't understand why we can't fund our base budget from reserves when we have rainy days. And I couldn't understand this. My first term or two, it didn't make sense to me. If you've got the money, pay the bills and move on with it and use it to reduce taxes. But someone explained it to me, like your own home and your own income. So if you have a paycheck that comes in every week, you pay your bills. You pay your bills out of that paycheck, and you set up your budget accordingly.
Another drink.
And I can hear someone talking. Is that me? Am I on?
Not sure. We're just looking. We can still hear you though.
Okay. All right. Anyway, so it's like you have a paycheck and you set up your budget and you pay your bills, you pay your rent and everything out of that. And you take hopefully some of that money and you set it aside for maybe to buy something, a down payment on a home. So that would be what we call a reserve. We're saving money for our bridges and roads and all those things that we need to do in our community. We can't take that money and on rainy days and feed the base budget. So if we get in our home, we get an income tax check, for instance, and we use that to pay down our hydro, it's not sustainable. We need to use that money out of our base budget. So if that helps to clarify anything for people, but that's what helped me understand why we couldn't just take money out of the reserves to bring down the base budget, because the base budget's going to be there next year and that hole's going to be there. If it's $1 million, or I think $600,000 was the number, Gord, that we dug a hole with last year that we have to fill this year. Is that correct? And did I explain it in layman's terms?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, you did explain it. Steve, what exactly was the number from last year of our base budget issue? I think it was close to 1.6 million.
Oh.
It was 1,589,000.
Yeah, and that's because we tried to do the right thing for our taxpayers and give them a break. And I get it. Like I totally get it. And we're really banging our heads against the wall here and grasping, trying to figure out ways, because this is really difficult. But I just wanted people to understand why, when Councillor Solomon wanted us to take the $3 million out of reserves, what that would do to next year's budget. And same with Councillor Latimer's motion to do the same. And that's why it couldn't be supported, because we were creating a problem for next year that would be even bigger than starting out at 4%. That's all I have. I just hope I clarified that, because there's a lot of people, it's just, you got the money, use it, but that's not how it works.
Thank you, Councillor Crew. Councillor Oche.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just through you to Gord. Gord, $300,000 house. What, where we sit right now? What would the taxes be on that?
Councillor Oche, just to clarify your question quickly, do you mean a house currently assessed at $300,000 or a house that would have recently been purchased at $300,000?
Let's say a house that's assessed at $300,000.
Yes, and maybe for exact number, I could get that for you. But where we're at on our average house, we're down to $77 a household at where we're at the 2.58%. But that's a house valued around $168,000. So roughly we're around $125 for a $300,000 assessment.
Okay. And when does impact? Oh, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. When does impact's new numbers come in?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Thank you, Councillor Othier. That's so what the assessments on properties right now is based on the 2016 assessment, and if there were decreases, they were recognized in the 2017 taxation year, and if there were increases, they were phased in but by the regulations across the province over a 4-year period. So 2017, 18, 19, and 2020. There was another updated reassessment done in 2019 that was meant to roll out for 2021 to 2024. However, last year with COVID, the province directed Impact to hold off on issuing that reassessment. So the 2021 tax bills will be based on your 2020 assessments. So for the majority of people, that means no change in assessment and than what they had in 2020. It actually is still up in the air of when that's coming back into place. We expected that Impact would be rolling out the new assessments shortly to be effective for the 2022 tax year, again with a 4-year phase in if your assessment went up. But to date, there hasn't been a final announcement from the province. I know the Ministry of Finance is dealing with this issue right now, but there has been no announcements. But I guess just overall, but a reminder is changing assessments is revenue neutral to the municipality. We deal with our budgets during budget time, and then we decide how that budget pie is being divided up based on tax policy and individual assessments. And the recent high gain, perhaps, that we've seen, particularly in residential assessments across Chatham-Kent, if everybody went up 30%, there's just no change in anyone's taxes. If your individual house goes up higher than whatever the average is, you may pay a little bit more. And if your house goes up lower than what that average rise is, you may pay a little less. But overall, that's a revenue neutral activity. It's very common to see this issue online, particularly in comments about our budget process. I've seen it many times over the last months. Those are false. It's revenue neutral to our budget process when if assessments are changing. That's a revenue neutral process. We just take what MPAC gives us as total assessments, divide it into the total budget, and come up with our 3,000 tax rates that we have across the municipality.
Oh, great. Thank you for explaining that, Gordon. That's everything I have at the moment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Oche. Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to Marjorie's comments on reserves, Gord, I'm curious if we were to take from reserves to alleviate the tax impact of the 2021 budget, which has been suggested and hasn't really been successful the last couple of nights. I understand the idea that, for instance, if we have a $500,000 reserve in Parks and Recreation, for instance, and if we pull 200,000 from that to, soften this year's blow, then the argument is that we have to put that $200,000 back next year. So my question is there a mandatory reserve level for every department? For instance, what I'm trying to get at here is if we were to take $200,000 from, say, Parks and Rec, and again, I'm just making this up as an example, leaving them with $300,000 rather than $500,000, next year, would that be satisfactory for Parks and Rec to have a $300,000 reserve rather than a $500,000? Are we obligated to top it up? Like, is there a dollar for dollar provincial mandate that, if a department, again, Parks and Rec for an example, if they have a $2 million annual budget, is there a provincial mandate legislation that says a reserve has to be at a separate level, or sorry, at a certain level? Or are we able to, in fact, take from that budget, from that reserve? The reserve is now depleted, so there may be a life cycle project that will not be completed in the upcoming years because we had a very terrible 2020, 2021. Do you understand what I'm getting at as far as like obligations to reserve?
Thank you, Councillor Bondi. Part of your question, I think so, yes. I think the other thing to clarify is using the homeowner example. If you took your money out of your savings account to pay your phone bill, you might not be obligated to put money back into your savings account, but the following year you're going to need to find new money to pay your phone bill with. So I think sometimes when that wording is used that we have to replace that money next year, we're actually talking about the base budget amount, the revenue that needs to be there to pay the ongoing expense, not necessarily the refunding of the reserve. But there's some other caveats around some reserves that Gord can answer too.
Okay, but no, I would argue that example, because if this year, if I take money out of my savings account to pay my phone bill, And this year I've made $30,000 in salary. Next year I make $35,000 in salary. I'm not going to have that same problem. It's not static. We're in a COVID year, in a tough year. So every year is not the same. So I understand the argument that, you know, if you take, like as Councillor Curd mentioned, your income tax refund money, which is effectively found money, and you use that to pay off what is a continual expense, like say your hydro bill or something. Well, next year you may not have that income tax refund, and that makes sense. So you're not going to have that found money. But if next year your income increases marginally or substantially, then you're going to be okay, because we can't predict year after year. That's my point, is that we say, well, we have to put it back for next year. But if we've had a lot of expenses this year due to COVID that we won't have next year, then I don't follow the argument. Okay.
Mr. Chair, it's Judy. Mr. Chair,
Yes, Judy?
sorry.
Yes, I was just muted.
Okay, sorry. I just want to let everybody know I am getting all kinds of messages that they are hearing some music or television or something in the background. IT is working on it. We have checked everybody's microphone. Everybody's does seem off except for the speakers, and it's happened to a few different speakers. So just to let everybody know that we're working on it, and we'll try to rectify that. We do know that it's distracting. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. And Gord, did you want to respond to Councillor Bonnie's question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I will. So, Councillor Bondi, I'll try to go back to your recreation example and walk through that issue using the numbers that you provided. So, as you said, you know, let's say they plan on spending $500,000 or had $500,000 in the reserve. So, what's first to remember is why was that money put in the reserve in the first place? So, in recreation facilities, along with all our other asset categories, we put away money in life cycle reserves to fund the life cycle maintenance and replacement program of those assets. So a playground, it may be a ball diamond fence, or you know, pick whatever example you want, but you know, let's just go with an example at a ball diamond or something. So Jeff Bray and his team in recreation facilities makes plans on what replacements of items need to be done to keep things in good order. And unfortunately, our asset management plan is now only funded at approximately 53% level. And so therefore already he's only doing half of what he should. And in general, of all our categories, we're only doing approximately half of what we should be doing. So things are being pushed beyond their limits as they are already, and where potentially on a ball diamond you can perhaps push that out a year or two more. Overall, it just comes back to bite you, and that's where we end up with closed roads and things just breaking down and repairing them, and it actually becomes much more costly than just replacing them at sometimes. So it's that we're so far underfunded on our life cycle plan that taking money from that reserve, it's not a bit if there's a long list of things that can just be easily put off. It's things that need to be done to meet the service level expectations of the public. And so that's so even I know Councillor McGregor gave the example of the household, but as a municipality, it's just not only did it come back to bite you the next year, of course, as Councillor Crew explained, it would cause a bigger increase next year. But even if you were okay with that and wanted to get the tax rate down for 1 year by using reserves, there's no found money, as you said, when you're using the income tax return model, of found money that's not already planned for. The only general reserve we have is our strategic reserve, and it has very little funds in it. And often things come up throughout the year that council dips into that reserve. The rest of the reserves have already been earmarked for projects that the public is waiting to get done, whether it's the street falling apart or the ball diamond falling apart or whatever that item is. And often there's the safety elements and just other reasons why things need to be fixed. And I think cost of maintenance is one of the biggest ones. Sometimes, I hearing stories of seeing crews fixing potholes all the time. Well, it's because sometimes we get so behind on some of these roads, we're always busy maintaining them, where it's more cost effective to fix the road once and for all. So I know that's getting to be a long answer, but we don't recommend it because every one of those reserves have been set aside by council for a purpose, and we're not seeing from council a direction to do a lower service level in any of those areas.
Councillor Bondi, did you have a follow-up question to that? Or is that okay?
Sorry, there. Can you hear me, Brock?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, no, it took me a second to get unmuted from the big alert that we just had. So, Gord, I guess, and thank you, Councillor or Chairman McGregor. So, Gord, I guess I'm to understand by that, then reserves are used. So they're earmarked for projects. So again, my make-believe example of the $500,000 in Parks and Rec, that reserve will be used potentially next year for the ball diamond rehabilitation. So the reserves are not constantly capped. First of all, I guess I can understand that there's no mandate that we hold reserves at a certain level, but so the reserves are used. And I think, the reason why reserves come up when we get into this crunch time at a budget is, councillors and the public say, well, why the heck do we have all this money in the bank and then raise taxes? But what you're telling me is that the reserves actually are used. So at some point that Parks and Rec reserve may go down to $100,000 from its current level of 500 due to a project that is in the foreseeable future. So reserves are not maintained at these high levels year after year after year, if I'm understanding things correctly.
Absolutely, that's exactly correct. So a good example right now in the binder is the bridge life cycle reserve. That's, right now might look a little high, but what you need to realize is all the projects that haven't gone to tender yet, so they might not be committed and are showing as in reserve, but are just huge amounts. So the biggest example with bridges is the 3rd Street Bridge in Chatham. That's in the plans over the next year or two. That'll be a huge drawdown just with that one project. There's no federal or provincial grants to help us out on that, and that's the type of things where engineering or Parks and Rec or whoever we're talking about plans ahead, and often there might be, as they're engineering the project, they're saving up the funds so that it's there in place to fix the problem when it's ready, to be done. So that's exactly what the life cycle reserves. You always have some balances in there because the engineers might be saving up for a bridge while recreation is spending some money, and then the next year it might be the reverse. So there's always somebody saving up for somebody, but they all have their 5 and 10 year capital plans of what they plan on maintaining. And I just want to emphasize, sometimes to push those assets to the brink, sometimes the maintenance costs get far beyond what the actual replacement costs would be. So,
well, great. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. And Gord, I trust that if you felt there was a reserve that was brimming with extra money that wouldn't be necessary in the near future, you would bring that to council's attention and say, this is some extra money that this department's not necessarily going to need in the near future, so it's available to be used. And I'm sure that you would do that. So here we are. Thank you very much, because the reserves obviously has come up in the last couple of days, and I got 2 phone calls today, which is a lot on anything, from people, who obviously I've never met before, who said, why don't you just use these reserves? You've got all this money in reserve. And I didn't really have a very good answer for them, because I'm not you, so you just cleared it up. So thank you very much, Gord.
Mr. Budget Chair, it's Thomas Kelly, General Manager of IES. If I could just add a really specific example that may help, is that right now in what we have in our bridge reserve is close to $42 million. This year, based on all the bridges that need to be done, we will spend 38 million of that. So that's a big number, $42 million. It looks like a lot of reserves, but we have plans in place to spend about 38 of that. So we'll have 3 million left for emergencies at the end of the year. And if we don't move forward with these, this is when we start to get into putting closing bridges and putting load restrictions on them because of the condition that they're in. So that's one of the probably the largest reserves out there right now that we have plans in place for this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bonnie, for the questions. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very interesting discussion that I've been listening to. And I like the house example that you used. So I just wanted to make it clear to people that it's not totally accurate, either the example in isolation, nor the comments earlier about the impact of reserves, using reserves. The house example from the motion that was brought last night was a rainy day account. So if you're in your own finances, 12 years ago, you saw that, there's days when there's real problems and I want to prepare for those ahead. And you decided to set aside money in a bank account that you weren't going to use unless it was a really rainy day. In other words, where the economy was affected somehow, and you may be fired or laid off. And you put it there for only that exact purpose. Are you telling me that that's an equivalent to a tax return in one single year? Quite frankly, I think that's the equivalent of what happened last night. The money was put away for a specific purpose, and that was for rainy day. And if you don't think COVID-19 is a rainy day, well, I guess we can respect each other and agree to disagree on that. But I think that's the better example of this particular reserve that was sought to be tapped last night. The comments that are being made from engineering and elsewhere are quite correct. But those are reserves that are set aside to do specific capital projects over time. That's not what this reserve was set up for. I was there when it was set up, and it was set up for just the very purpose of having a year like this one. Of course, we weren't smart enough to think that it would be caused by a pandemic, but we were smart enough to realize that in 2008, there was an economic collapse in the marketplace. So that's the better example. I don't think you can broad brush this and say that reserves are not meant to be used in emergency purposes when this one was set up for that very purpose. So, Gord, do you have any comment on that?
thank you, Mr. Chair. So without going into the details that Polly had mentioned, I about that reserve last night. It's you're right that that reserve is for an economic downturn reserve. Was called the Ontario Works Economic Downturn Reserve, and that's the reserve that you're referring to. It started the year with about just over $5 million in it. However, in this budget, due to the pandemic, we're already drawing down on that reserve by $2.5 million for our homelessness response. And this pandemic doesn't have an end in sight yet. And it's just prudent to keep that money set aside. Yes, you could drain the reserve, but then what would you have for next year? And I have, you know, none of us have a crystal ball to know when this pandemic is going to end. Particularly in Ontario Works, where the caseloads are going to go over the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years because of this pandemic. And the exact reason why that rainy day fund was set aside seems like it's coming into play. And so I'm not, you know, again, I think that's a reserve that's been set aside for our specific purpose, a rainy day, and it's being used for a rainy day in our homelessness response and the potential rise in Ontario Works cases that might come through over the next couple years. So I disagree with your premise that that's available just to write down the taxes this year and not to worry about it. It might cause an even higher increase next year, not only because we would have to deal with replacing that money in base next year, but also we might have to be faced with staffing up at Ontario Works by using new tax dollars next year, and next year might be just as tough.
Yeah. Well, my premise, Mr. Chairman and Gord, is not to use the money to reduce the taxes and not worry about it. My premise is that money was used for homeless and people with drug addictions and mental health issues, and there's an infrastructure within our municipality, and they have well advocated for by Polly Smith and April Dyke. And you know, that money can be used for that. Some of it can be used for that. All I was suggesting is that there is another class of people, a group of people who work every day hard and sometimes with middling incomes, and who have, you know, live paycheck to paycheck. And this pandemic has hit them equally hard, and they are struggling to stay off of ODS, the works programs and the welfare programs. And I think they deserve advocacy too. And to put the taxes up on people like that, well, I guess I'm the advocate for them, and I hope the majority of council would be. Because they're just sometimes days away, a paycheck away from joining another group. So that's why I think the money should be used for that. It's not, oh, just use it and reduce taxes and walk away. And it certainly isn't for the people who are what some people describe as wealthy. It's for the people who are retired and on fixed incomes, advocate for, and the people who are sometimes having to work just to keep the mortgage paid and the food coming in. And now we started up tonight a tax increase. That's why I see it as a good use of the rainy day money. I don't think we can restrict things to just one group. So anyway, I've said my piece. I don't want to say any more about it.
Thank you, Councillor Solomon. Councillor Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been asked a couple times, the $18.1 million that we took from reserves for a sports complex based if we were to get upper level government funding, which we didn't get. Therefore, the 18.1 went back into the reserves. I've been asked, could someone explain where that 18.1 is?
Thank you, Councillor Finn. There's a recent report on how that was redistributed, and we can get that pulled up to summarize. But that came before us at council. I believe it was December 14th, so fairly recently. But if you just give staff a second, they will get up a summary of that for you.
Yes, because some people who are listening now didn't listen back then. And I have to agree with Councillor Solomon. Yes, the homeless are being taken care of, the lower income, but there are many that haven't been working since last March, many who still aren't working, many who their CERB will run out within the month. A lot of those have had to use that entire CERB, that if there is a way that we can help them, because come income tax, they couldn't save that money. They needed that money. And to tell somebody, well, you have to put $300 away because you know income tax is coming, and that $300 is their food or their hydro bill, I can't expect them to keep that 300. That is a reserve to put away, but it is coming back because they need it. And I believe that these reserves are something that everybody in this community needs. So I do have to agree with Councillor Solomon on that one.
Councillor Finn, we've got that report here, so we can get those numbers for you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Finn. You're correct that we did a couple years ago set aside 18.5 million for the multi-sports complex. As we were making our application to the province, we wanted to show that we had our share of the funding in place, and that we wouldn't need to go back to the taxpayer to ask for additional funding after the fact. So we wanted to show up front. Once that application was turned down by the province and was not forwarded to the federal government for consideration, we did come back to council near the end of last year. Every year we bring a reserve housekeeping report where if there is a reserve that's no longer needed, we make recommendations to council of what to do with that. Council approved the motion at that meeting to transfer $2.6 million to pay for the completion of the Chatham Public Works Garage. 4.7 million went to our backbone fiber commitment, and you see some of the payoffs of that being delivered today in the Swift announcement, bringing fiber to 4,600 homes across rural Chatham-Kent, and 11.2 million went to the disaster mitigation reserve to go against our $24 million commitment to $40 million of projects that are being planned over the next 9 years through a grant program from the federal government, where they're giving our share was 24 million. The federal government's chipping in 16 million for $40 million of projects along the Thames and Sydenham rivers for flood prevention. And so through many communities along the Thames and Sydenham rivers, there's a large list of, in some cases, close to emergency projects that are in the works by Tim Dick's drainage group, and that those projects now have the funds to go ahead for the next few years. But we will be coming to council with recommendations in future budgets to fund the remaining 12 million that we need to cover that commitment that we've made to the federal government.
Okay, so what was the tax impact because of that reserve being used?
We saved having to ask for a base amount of probably 1% to 2% in this year's budget to fund the disaster mitigation portion that we would have been asked to make over the next few years. So it allowed us not to have to ask for new tax dollars, and was able to lower this year's draft 2021 draft budget.
So there is a possibility that it could be pulled from reserve and not have a tax impact, is what you're saying.
No, exactly the opposite. We still need $12 million more for the disaster mitigation reserve, and that's a commitment that council's already committed to the federal government, that work is going to be done over the next. It is a 10-year plan, but we're 1 or 2 years into it now. But that's a commitment that council has made, and we're about halfway through funding that commitment now. So if it weren't for the reallocation of this funding, we would have had to increase this year's tax increase to be funding that reserve.
Okay.
So it's not available. It's a committed, council has committed that to that federal government disaster mitigation and adaptation fund projects.
But I'm saying we pulled 18.1 million to begin with from a reserve that didn't have a tax impact the following year. Am I correct on that?
Oh, yes. Originally, a couple of years ago, yes, that $18 million was pulled from from several existing reserves.
Okay, but it didn't have a tax impact.
Not back then, no.
Okay, thank you.
And Gord, it didn't have a tax impact because we were reorganizing funds for what would be one-time projects. Is that correct? We weren't funding any operations through reallocating that reserve. Is that correct?
Correct. There was just I'd have to go back to that original report, but off the top of my head, there's about 10 different sources through a housekeeping reserve housekeeping activity that we did that year, where things had come in under budget, for example, and that there was leftover funds that we pulled together to come up with that 18.5 million.
So, for example, like Councillor Latimer's motion, where it was extra money, would be a prime example.
Yes.
Which wouldn't have made a tax impact.
It wouldn't have a tax impact if that was reallocated to another reserve or used on a one-time project. It will have a tax impact in future years if you use it to lower a base budget amount.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pinsino, followed by Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring a motion forward. I move that 300,000 be removed from base budget at staff's discretion of which department to remove it from, without affecting services or service levels. If I get a second, or I got some comments.
If anyone's on the speaker list, can they put their hand down for a second? Because I can't tell if someone's seconding it or having a...
I'd be happy to second it. We could just do it that way. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Seconded by Councillor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a $334 million budget, and it should be easy enough to find 300,000 within our base budget. Every year we have surpluses of $1 million plus, sometimes right up to 1.8, 1.7 million, which we turn around and we use it in some spots like winter maintenance, but mostly it goes into reserves again. So our reserves now are high, and I think this is just a great way to knock some money off the budget without affecting any services. Thank you. This is doable.
Do we have other comments on this motion? Anyone else have any questions, any comments? So Mr. Quinton, we'll go to just comment to you first, and then we'll go through our speakers list.
Budget Chair, it's Don Shropshire speaking. If I could offer a comment, the board might be able to move up.
Yep, Don, if you'd like to start.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate that there's some discretion given, but we have worked hard to put together the budget. We have a list of activities in 9H that was shared with council. Those were the ones that we thought was the best opportunity to actually change the service level. I appreciate what Councillor Pinson was trying to accomplish, but where we've had service reduction, so I'm going to give you an example. We had some service reduction in April's area. There was actually a reduction in some of the staff because some of our caseloads actually went down last year. We're projecting them to stay down. So we saw an opportunity for efficiencies that was built into the budget. So those were actually built in with the draft budget that you have. If I had other areas where we could make a reduction where there were not going to be a change in the service levels the council has mandated, those would have already been baked into the budget. I don't have another place where I can sit here with you and confidently say we can do that without baking. We can remove $300,000, but I think really council, we have heard time and again from several different council members that they're really concerned about changing a level of service. So whether that's reducing the number of hours that our offices are open or changing some other, how often we cut the grass or whatever, all of those are tied to staffing. All of those are tied to service levels. So respectfully, I'm asking council to give us at least some areas where you're prepared to entertain some cuts, because we don't want to make a cut, upset people, and then come back in and have council say, well, that's not an acceptable area. So I'm not sure if Mr. Quinton has anything to add, but thank you for listening to the concern.
Thank you, Don. Just to add, if there's an area that you think that we're not as efficient as we could be in, the service review path is the way to go, where that's fully investigated with a team. It's not just a team from the division involved, it's a team across the organization that comes together with community consultation where needed, and will come with their best recommendation. And that's exactly what I'm looking for council to provide items at council meetings on what you'd like to look at. But otherwise, I think Don said everything else. Thanks.
Thank you, Gord. Councillor Pinsino, we've got this motion up on the board. Does that capture your motion accurately?
That is it.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarity, it says at administration's discretion as to which department, with no reduction in current services to be used to offset this year's tax impact. So would this question for staff, the interpretation of this motion would outside of budget council still have to approve changes that would be made to find this $300,000?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. So how I read that, this is a base budget reduction that we would report back to council on where these reductions were made, back to a council meeting within the next couple months.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go through the speakers list here. Councillor Oche, followed by Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Chairman. Gordon, is there a particular department that seems like every year we have a little over $1 million surplus at the end of the year or partway through? We seem to find it. Is there a particular one that's we're always finding has a surplus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, it does often vary very dramatically from year to year. Of course, 2020, we actually have we're projecting a $4.3 million deficit because of the COVID impacts. But historically, it is, we're pretty close on to budget. Like we do have this $360 million budget, and the variance is actually, as a percentage of the budget, very, very small, usually under about 0.5%. And where that often comes from is things that we can't necessarily estimate that accurately. So things like fluctuations in interest income. I know that was one of our items in this year's budget, but that's one area that there's often a fluctuation. And then new assessment growth. We do know that building permits right now look pretty positive, but until the houses are commercial buildings are built and the assessments come, we don't know where that's going to go. So often but whatever that assessment change is, if it does beat our budgeted amount, that does come back as new revenues into the next following year's budget. So it's only a 1-year occurrence when we have maybe an exceptional year of new assessment. So some of the recent high surpluses were where we had a Enbridge pipeline that was put in that gave us a higher assessment than was originally expected. And some of the timing of that and the actual amount that was going to be assessed, it was really hard to predict. So so in non-operating is where usually the majority of that may come, but it's in items that are hard to predict. And as far as departmental variances, it varies a lot. Public works, of course, weather is one of the biggest variants in their area. And it could be, when it's very dry in the summer, there's dust control issues, and of course the winter control impacts that are weather related. So I hope that answers your question, but really there's no, if there was a division that habitually had a surplus, we deal with that internally and bring savings to the following year's budget already. That's the type of savings that we already look for.
Okay, thank you. And once more through you, Mr. Chair, to Gord. Gord, you keep saying that we have I believe, $4.3 million deficit from 2020.
Yes.
But that has been covered by the provincial government, has it not?
Yes. The Safe Start Restart funding, we're using 4.3 million of that to cover the deficit. There is an application process that we have to fill out paperwork for the province and submit for approvals that will be done at the end of March this year, but it's fully expected that that entire $4.3 million deficit will be covered from Safe Restart funds.
Okay, great. Thanks for.
Thank you, Councillor Oche. Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like the motion. I support it. I wish the number was higher, frankly. So I've got a couple of suggestions as to maybe where this money could come from. As Mr. Kelly informed us, we go above and beyond our winter control. So there's one. We could cut back to provincial standards rather than going above and beyond. And that is, as I recall, something to the effect of a $5.86 million annual budget. So I'm pretty sure we could find 300,000 in there somewhere. And secondly,
Councillor Bondi, just you would have to amend the motion for that one because it says no reduction in current services. So if you wanted the money to come from there, you'd have to amend that motion to not include the reduction in current services wording. Just if that's where you wanted to go with
sure.
it.
No, that's fine. I'm kind of commenting, so I'll leave that up to Councillor Pinsno if he wants to amend it. I'm just giving my opinion on where it could come from. So let's just leave it at that. Winter control. I also think there's some transit issues with the interurban bus system that's currently in place that doesn't seem to be very well used. And maybe I'll leave this with Councillor Pinsno, and I completely and 100% support this. It may be difficult to kind of go with no service reductions if we're going to take something away. That's just the narrative that we have here, right? But those are two services that I think could be altered maybe rather than reduced, changed. So maybe we cannot use the word reduced if that makes it any easier. But I think it's out there, and honestly, I wish the number was higher. We can probably get a significant tax impact out of what Councillor Pinsnow is doing. I commend him for a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can comment on the transit topic as well. That's exactly what has happened over the last year. There's been an extensive service review and public consultation done by Thomas Kelly and his team. It's making recommendations for changes to those interurban routes, along with the conventional transit service in Chatham. And just a reminder to council that the vast majority of those interurban routes are actually funded by provincial gas tax annual funding. So that area basically, and by the way, you're entering into 5 or 7 year contracts with the service provider with that's going out to tender. So it's just an example of how difficult some of this becomes. But the point, though, I was trying to make is back to the service reviews. That's exactly what's been done in the last year on transit across the municipality, looking for efficiencies and looking at the demands of services and coming to the right mix that was included in this year's budget. So this will always come back to a service needing to be reviewed, and this motion is to become more efficient without reducing the service levels.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Gord, I just have a question for you. I think it was about 10 years ago that Councillor Art Sterling brought forward a motion regarding a service review, and it was a big deal. There was a lot of debate. We had a vote on it. It was incredibly costly. It didn't seem to make much sense because we were asking department upon department to look internally to evaluate their level of service and where savings could be found. And the whole thing ended up being relatively pointless. But in any event, I guess from what you're saying, two things, which you said a couple of days ago, that council seems to have very little control over the budget, I think is ringing truer and truer every day. And secondly, if there is a service review taking place right now, why haven't we been informed of it? And it certainly didn't get the attention that it did about 10 years ago. Thanks.
Thank you. I can start answering that question, and perhaps Steve can chime in with some of the things that are happening right now that you might not be aware of. So you're right. The term service review back approximately 10 years ago, when not sure the exact year, but there were I guess several, I would say, low hanging fruit that were brought to council. That there were some quick wins with that process. And I'll give you just to refresh memories, and I know half of council is new and wasn't there at that time. I'll give an example would be horticultural services, where back 10 years ago, we ran a greenhouse. We grew our own flowers from seeds. We had full-time year-round staff with that, and we were able to save a substantial amount of money. I'm sure it was more than 300,000 by stop using the greenhouses. We divested the property that the greenhouses was located on, and now we just buy the small plants at a very at a very cost-effective rate, and it saved us a pile of money. But that's exactly what we need to do, is continue to find those efficiencies and keep bringing those ideas to council. There was several items that were brought to council that were passed, such as the horticultural items. And there were several reports to council that were not approved, that it was decided not to move forward with the reductions. But maybe I'll turn it over to Steve to just talk briefly on some of the service reviews that his team's working on right now.
Thanks, Gord. So there's a number of service reviews that are either currently ongoing, have recently been completed, or will be started in the near future. Some of those are the salary plan module, so that's will assist the municipality in more accurate budgeting of the salary wages on a yearly basis. Currently ongoing is the corporate communication service review, determine the most efficient manner to communicate both internally and externally. The transit service review. Then also, there's a couple that have come up to council recently. One of those being the tax rate modernization review as well. So there are a number that either are ongoing or will be starting in the near future.
Budget Chair, it's Don speaking. It's Don speaking. May I add one other comment, please? Thanks. I do want to make it clear the comments we're making are not in any way, shape, or form trying to not make a cut in the budget. That's not the motivation. But we recognize that council are the ones that are going to get the calls on the consequences. So some of the examples that Councillor Bondi provided, I think, are very helpful. Those are areas where council has discretion over lowering the service level that would not be impacted by the provincial government's requirements for us to be at a certain level. So last year we came to council in April with a number of recommendations that council supported to try and reduce the impact of the COVID shortfall. So things like our horticulture, that was an example of where we ended up giving flowers to local volunteer groups or horticultural groups, and they did a lot of the planting. Some of them that we didn't have volunteers to plant, those were resold back to one of the local stores. So that's the sort of thing that we could entertain that would have maybe a modest impact on services. We could not hire some staff to plant flowers in the summertime or do some of that work. And we could work with local volunteer groups across the community to see if they do that type of planting. So those are some examples of things that we could definitely do, but it is a change in the service levels. And as council will remember last year, one of our service level recommendations was to reduce the number of grass cutting we had. It worked out fine for about a month and a half, and then we got a lot of rain, and then the grass grew like crazy. And then members of council were getting calls and saying, well, come on guys, cut the grass. And by that time we'd already sort of changed our contracts and so on. So I know that council, it's as hard as it is, I know you're the ones that are really responsible for giving us that balance between how much something's going to cost and what level of service our citizens are going to get. So the winter controls above the minimums would be great. Good examples, horticultural flower planting would be some. But we're on receipt for that. We're not trying to not cut the costs. We just want to make sure that council is not going to be caught surprised when they get calls if there's a change in service levels. Thank you.
Just for clarity again, would we be able to see those recommendations come back? Because as it stands, this motion asks for no reduction. It says this has to happen with no reduction in current services. So to me, that's where I'm struggling with the wording. It cuts off any of those things we mentioned as options.
I looked at Councillor Pinsino for clarity. If the way it's voiced now, I think Gord had it right, is we'd want to come back to council and say, we've taken the direction from council in the budget. Here's, 2 or 3 options for, reducing the $300,000, and we'd like council to, basically approve us going forward on those.
Councillor Pinsino, could we have clarity on that? Thanks.
I'm good with that, with administration coming back and saying where they're going to pull the 300,000 from.
So that would include possible service reductions, the examples Councillor Bonnie was talking about, and staff has mentioned there as far as winter control and horticulture and those types of things.
I'd like to keep it at no reduction in current service levels. Because I do think we can find this, like I say, we have 1 million to 2 million surplus. This year we don't, but traditionally we do. And I honestly think we can find this.
We have a budget of about $333 million order of magnitude. And typically our budget variance is somewhere less than 1%, closer to 0.5%. So we, it looks like why $1 million looks like a lot. That's basically what it would cost us to do 2 major snow removals if we had two significant snowfalls. So that's where the variability comes in. And it's not like that money goes to waste, right? Like that gets reinvested in things that council can determine where we're going to invest money in the future. So I understand your point. We will look for the money, but as I say, if I knew where $300,000 could be found, it would already be in front of council. Thank you.
Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess you kind of asked my question for me in regards to the clarification that I was requesting, just because the comments that Councillor Bondy had made to me kind of goes in a different direction of this the motion. And the quick question I have to Mr. Kelly, he did mention on the first day of budget one savings that he could potentially find was that reduction. And I know that he's not going to be able to give us a high level response, but is there any kind of anticipation what that savings just meeting the provincial standards would look like?
Thank you, Budget Chair. So we've actually done some additional work on that just today even. And so the first issue is the fact that in our downtown cores, we have a higher service level than what's required in the minimum maintenance standards. And so, for example, minimum maintenance standard says when you hit 8 centimeters of snow, you need to clear the snow on the sidewalk. And if there's anticipation of ice, you need to react. And if there is ice evidence, you need to react within 48 hours. So those are the two primary. There's the snow removal and there's the salting. So in our downtown cores, we're actually at 7.5 centimeters and we're at 24 hours. So the difference in 0.5 centimeter doesn't matter so much, but if we were to just adopt the minimum maintenance standards, it would allow us just to move from 24 to 48 hours. That would provide us with at least $15,000 savings. And another idea is that with all residential owners, we ask them to salt the sidewalk. We could do the same for the downtown business owners, and that would save an additional $50,000. So there's the example, we could save up to $65,000 per year out of the base budget by, first of all, adopting the MMS, and secondly, harmonizing the service that downtown businesses would also really align themselves with residential. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to make a quick comment on that. I think that I can't speak for any other councillors, but I know in the past 2 weeks in regards to the snowfalls that I've had significant calls and concerns in regards to even, kind of what's transpiring now. And I would really question the decision to save, $65,000. I know that's a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, to save $65,000 with all the concerns and the issues it's going to cause our residents in regards to that one there, that would be something that I just don't think would be, a smart decision, especially for, the seniors of our community.
Thank you, Councillor Sakachi. Mayor Caniff. Mayor Caniff, I see your mic is on. My earbud is in, but I still can't hear you. We still can't hear you. I see that your microphone's green, so it should be on. So I don't know if you have a microphone issue if you're wearing a headset. Mayor Caniff, we'll get someone to call you because your microphone still looks green, but I can't hear you. So just while we get someone on the phone with you, Mayor Caniff, Councillor Harrigan.
Great, thank you. Through the chair, I have a couple of questions. The first question I have, because I, did take some kind of a look at the tab 10 around previous budgets. And I had asked the question to Kathy Hoffman around our staff education / travel budget, recognizing that in 2020, there was likely far less travel, and could we project those savings as a one-time into 2021? So my first question is, Kathy, can you explain to me what happened last year with those kind of cost savings because nobody traveled in 2020?
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, Mayor Caniff. You can go right after Councillor Harrigan, but your mic is working.
I just plugged my headset in. It was showing that I was unmuted before, but okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll go to Kathy, and then after Councillor Harrigan's questions, we'll go back to you, Mayor Caniff.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. It's Kathy Hoffman speaking, and thank you, Councillor Harrigan, for your question. Last year, what we did for the travel budget, we have our travel and training budget linked together, and for the portion of those particular lines that were linked to travel that were not used for obvious reasons during the pandemic, that there was not travel taking place, we used part of the surplus for that to apply it against some of the costs associated with COVID. So for example, we used a fair bit of that money to be able to offset things like personal protective equipment that we were purchasing in ways that we hadn't done, previously, right? For a whole series of things that had to be implemented in various of our workplaces, and personal protective equipment we needed to provide to our staff and continue to provide to our staff as the new requirements for protection evolve. So that was, in rough numbers, about a $50,000 one-time savings that we have applied against these sorts of things. We do anticipate that after we are through the vaccine period and after we turn to an environment where staff are going back to training courses again and so forth, as opposed to virtual attendance at things, that travel budget will again be utilized in the future.
Great, thank you. And I guess for me, the part on here that on this motion that I struggle with is again around that no reduction in current services, because ultimately, I feel that 90-something% of the budget should be spent on service bases, and after that, you have things like overhead, like paper and printing and pencils and staples orders that people need to actually do the work that they're doing. And my own experience is, if you're looking at reducing in those areas, it just becomes a bit of a nickel and dime, and one department starts to steal the paper from the other department, etc. So I'm wondering if I'm just wondering how this would work. So if there is no reduction of services and 300,000 is removed from the base budget, will that come back to council? If there are service reductions, if you can't find $300,000 in the non-service reduction areas of the budget? Sorry, Gord, that might have been a complicated question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, I fully expect that we need to come back to council detailing exactly where we come up with the 300,000, or if we can't, I don't want to say we can't, we have enough, but we would come up with a detailed list and bring it to a regular council meeting within a few months on what are our suggestions for cutting into budgets. And it may be little amounts all across the board, or there might be I'm not prejudging what we come up with, but we would come back with a list to council and the motion is with no reductions to current services. So if we can do that, we will. If we can't, we still need to report back what we could, if we only get halfway there and it's cutting into services, we need to come back to council to let you know. We had a very similar motion in a budget about 6 years ago. That was mainly unsuccessful and ended up coming back. Most of it came back as an increase in the following year's budget because there wasn't sustainable cuts. But with this motion, we would try to find $300,000 of savings.
And so after we were to pass this budget, if you weren't able to find that amount of savings, I'm guessing the recommendation would be to pull the difference from our strategic reserve or another reserve.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, that would be an option.
Gord, would that just be a one-year option because this is a base budget change? So you couldn't do that year over year. You're looking for like a permanent $300,000 savings?
So the motion to look for a permanent savings. So, but if we were unsuccessful on coming to that and we brought a report back to council, let's say we found $200,000 of savings, but the last 100,000 had a service cut involved. We would come to council. If council was unwilling to do that service cut, we would then make a recommendation to fund the 2021 shortfall from a reserve, and then bring that 100,000 back as a base request to replace that base budget in the following year's budget.
Right. So I guess, in some ways I am conflicted in terms of how I'll support this, but I wish it said with minimal reduction to current services, because I think that actually gives finance a bit more of a broader scope to work with EMT to understand this. But I think it's important that members of council and the public are aware that if this happens, we may just be pushing $300,000 or somewhere between $0 and $300,000 into next year's budget. It's worded a bit differently, but that would be the outcome. So those are all my comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harrigan. Mayor Caniff.
Thank you, Budget Chair. Now that we can, you can hear me. Councillor Pinsino, I was looking at doing a friendly amendment to your motion. Hear me out. What I'm thinking of doing, we would continue to remove 300,000 from the base budget. What I'm going to, based on all the discussions that just happened, administration saying they need some time to go over and review through service reviews potential savings. So what I'm going to suggest, we can figure out the wording later, is that we, for this year, we take the $300,000 out of reserve with administration to come back by the fall of 2021 to show through after their service reviews how they're going to maintain those cuts moving forward. So then they would replace the $300,000 that comes out of reserve in 2021 with 300,000 of savings that they found in the base budget through service reviews. So we keep the same idea, but it flows, and the administration has time to find those permanent cuts. Councillor Pinsino, are you okay? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm here. I just didn't leave my motion just the way it is. Sorry.
Okay.
And as a reminder, we're in budget committee, so there's no 2/3 requirement for bringing a motion back. So if this motion were to fail and Mayor Caniff still wanted to bring the motion that he had mentioned as an amendment, that would still be an option. Or even if this motion passed, Mayor Caniff could bring back the same motion to modify, and we could vote on that as well. Do we have any other comments related to this motion? I don't see any other hands up. So with that, I will call a vote.
All votes are in. And the motion passes.
Any other questions or motions from the floor? I don't see any hands up currently. Mayor Caniff, go ahead. Mayor Caniff, you're muted.
Thank you. Just I would
There
like to put that Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Just I would like to put that motion forth that basically what we just did, the 300,000 come out of reserves for this year, because there's going to be a lot of confusion as far as savings, but with administration to come back in the prior to the 2022 budget with concrete plans to eliminate 300,000 from the budget.
Okay, we'll just take a moment to get that wording up here, and I believe I see Councillor Latimer as a second. Is that correct, Councillor Latimer?
That is correct.
Thank you. So just bear with us a minute. We'll get a speakers list up here as well, and we'll just wait on the wording. Or perhaps if you want to make some comments, Mayor Caniff, while we wait to get that up.
I think I've based my comments, but generally it's going to give administration some time to come up with those permanent cuts and making sure that they are permanent cuts moving forward, and to have some thought out, because what's going to happen this year if we roll that out now from the starting point, they're not going to have they're only going to have 6 months or 5 months or whatever it is time to find those cuts. This way it'll allow a full 12 months of the cuts that they come up with to be in place. So I think this sets it up more for success moving forward than to put it out now, given that we're already 1 month, a little over a month into the year already. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Councillor Sakachi. You're muted, Councillor Sakachi. There you go.
Yeah, actually, I was muted by the organizer.
Yeah, we got that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to. So is the motion going to state what reserve this is going to come through, Mr. Chair? Maybe that's directed to Mayor Caniff.
Yeah, it's they're just naming it right now, I believe, in as they get the motion up here. So I think it will read the strategic reserve.
And is there a potential to amend that all monies not found this year can be removed from the reserve, and that administration look for the full 400,000 the following year? Because my hope is if they maybe find 160,000 in savings this year, just to throw a number out there, or 80,000 in savings, that we're only pulling, let's say, if it's 80,000, 220 from the reserve instead of the full amount. I'm not sure if Mayor Caniff is okay with amending it to something of that nature, or if he's very set on the fact that it be the full 300,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just respond to that? I thought about that as well. Sure. That was my initial thought, but I thought, okay, if let's say they come up with 100,000 savings and implement it this year, effectively we'll have a surplus of 100, which will go back into the reserves. So I looked and said the chain will follow in. It'll go back into reserves anyway. It's an accounting entry, whether you want to have it flow into reserve or flow into a surplus, then reserves, or just take it and put it back reserves. I would look to Mr. Quinton to say what his preference is. It all becomes the same to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're exactly right. We could just deal with it at your end. Of course, if we made some savings, it all goes back to reserves anyway. Or you could change the motion to that up to $300,000. So either way, in the end, it's the exact same accounting entries.
All right, then I will like to modify it there so the council can see exactly that if there is any savings this year, that we can recognize that, and what comes from the reserve account gets reduced by that amount. This will help better track the the costs moving forward of what savings there has been in 2021.
Okay, so we'll amend the beginning of that to up to 300,000. And that should capture Councillor Sakachi's intent and your intent, I think, Mayor Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my only discretion. Just I'll trust Mr. Quinton and Mayor Caniff's, obviously their background in accounting. I was just hoping to see kind of, if or what kind of savings did occur from, the motion that was put on the floor. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sakachi. I don't see any other hands up just yet. So I'll make a couple comments. I think that this just gives some more direction to that $300,000. Gives us a little bit more control over seeing a report in the fall and just a little more specific direction. And I think it does maybe commit council to looking at things like Councillor Latimer's motion from Monday night that we could put towards this 300,000. So I think it, for me, just offers more specific direction and still achieves that 300,000. So with seeing no other comments, we'll call the vote. And that'll just take a second to call that vote. We're getting it put into the system. Okay, and now it's centered, so I will call the vote.
We're still waiting for one more vote, Councillor. Okay, all votes are in. And the motion's carried.
Thank you. Steve, do we have an update on what number we're at right now?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. We currently stand at 2.40%.
Okay, and do we know what that commercial impact would be if we were to pass the budget at 2.4%? I'll give you a moment for that one.
It'd be roughly a 6.5% reduction in the taxes on the average commercial property.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. But could you repeat that? I glitched out. Maybe I was the only one, but I didn't get that number.
Sure, we'll repeat that, Councillor Bondi.
The average reduction for commercial property in their tax bill for 2021 would be approximately 6.5%, taking into account the education decrease.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
And if I'm not seeing any other hands for motions from the floor, Councillor Foss, go ahead.
Thank you, Budget Chair. I would like to move that we accept the budget at 2.4%.
And I've got a second from Councillor Crew. Do I have any comments about accepting the budget? Any feedback? Okay, seeing none, I'll read the motion. That the Budget Committee adopt the 2021 budget as amended throughout the past 4 evenings with a tax impact of 2.4% and adjourn budget deliberations. And I will call the vote. Does anyone know if they perhaps hit the wrong button and hit abstain instead of voting? Okay, so we're just going to quickly take this down, put the question back up and vote again, just to make sure that we're either voting yes or no.
Council, we are waiting for one more vote, so please make sure you hit the submit button. All votes are in, and the motion passes.
Thank you. So that means we need to briefly move into council. So I will give up the virtual chair to Mayor Caniff, and then Mayor Caniff, if you can call on me to make the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I'd like to open up the regular council meeting, and the sole purpose of approving the 2021 budget. Councillor Brock McGregor, can you put the motion forward, please?
Thank you. As recommended by Council by Budget Committee, the 2021 municipal budget resulting in a tax increase of 2.4% be approved.
Can I get a seconder for that?
Oh, Councillor Foss, we have is seconding. I can see the hands here.
Okay. Any questions?
You've got a few hands up, so I'll give them to you, Mayor Caniff. You've got Councillor Solomon, followed by Councillor Bondi.
Okay. Councillor Solomon, followed by Councillor Bondi.
No questions. I request a recorded vote.
It is a recorded vote, and we can any of the votes are recorded, and they can post the outcome of who voted which way. I'm just going to confirm at what time that gets done.
I can do it now, though, Councillor McGregor, just so that people can hear it now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Just please let me know when you're ready if there's any other questions or anything.
Okay, Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. So I guess so that's a roll call. We'll go through the usual roll call thing.
Yes, we will.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Is there any other hands up?
No, just me, and I'll make a few comments before we vote on this motion. So I did want to first thank members of Budget Committee for their hard work over the past few nights, and for their patience with the chair as we work through doing this virtually for the first time. So certainly presented some challenges, but everyone did a great job of adapting to the technology, and I think we accomplished some good and spirited discussion. I also want to thank the public for what was a very healthy and impactful year of public feedback, and hope to see that continue in future budget processes. And I did want to thank staff for their hard work over the past many months preparing the draft budget, and further work during deliberations in getting us information and working quickly and on the fly. And a special thanks to IT for all of their support as well. And that's all I have. Thank you, Mayor Caniff.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I would just like to prior to that, just make a quick comment. I'd like to thank Councillor B. McGregor for being the chair. I think over the last 7 years is being involved, this is my 7th budget, that I think we've had the most spirited discussion on various things, that there's been a lot of challenges of administration, challenges of the increases. And so I want to thank the chair, and I want to thank everyone else for participating and pushing hard to get down to the 2.4%. So with that, we'll put it to vote.
Mayor Caniff, there is one more hand up. I know you can't see them. Councillor Oche has his hand up.
Councillor Oche?
Thank you, Your Worship. First, I'd just like to say I'm putting this on myself and all of our council. Yes, and I don't mean to all of the council. There are some that said, yep, we need to cut some things. Some of the things that we need to, or that have been brought to us to be cut, aren't necessarily the only things that should be cut, as far as I'm concerned, or that have to be cut. And I'm hoping we'll have a large list of all different types of property in front of us to choose from during this coming year, and well before budget committee. And obviously I'm still not happy with this, but we need to do what we need to do to help out the residents of Chatham-Kent. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll
Over
do
to
a
you,
roll
Madam
call.
Clerk.
Thank you. Councillor Oche,
No.
Councillor Bondi,
No.
Councillor Sakachi,
No.
Councillor Crew,
Yes.
Councillor Foss,
Yes.
Councillor Finn,
No.
Councillor Hall,
Yes.
Councillor Harrigan,
Yes.
Councillor Kirkwood White,
Sorry, yes.
Councillor Latimer,
Yes.
Councillor McGrail,
No.
Councillor Brock McGregor,
Yes.
Councillor Carmen McGregor,
Yes.
Councillor Pinsino,
No.
Councillor Solomon,
No.
Councillor Thompson,
Yes.
Councillor Wright,
No.
Mayor Caniff,
Yes.
the vote passes 10-8.
All right. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Happy to make that motion, Mayor Caniff.
Councillor B. McGregor, seconded by
Councillor Bondi's hands up.
Councillor Bondi. Anyone opposed? Seeing none. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.